So let's take a look at one of my new acquisitions here for the Tangent Audio Labs. It's a glue dropper. Well, sort of, not quite. This is actually a solder paste dispenser. You've probably seen these on a few people's videos. Basically, it's just a box with a pressure regulator and a gauge, a little timer circuit built in. There's a solenoid valve inside. And a small vacuum generator, and this gets hooked up to shop air, basically just an air compressor, and either with a foot switch or with a little handheld switch, basically you dispense solder paste from syringes straight onto pads on a PC board that you're going to populate. And with the timer, basically it will distribute a fixed amount of solder paste for every press of the pedal or the switch. So you can very rapidly move through all the pads on your board and put down a little dab of solder paste. And if you're not doing solder stencils, this is a very quick way to get a couple of prototypes built up. In particular, if you're building up a board for the first time and you only want to start out by, say, building up the power supply, it's very easy just to populate those components. And a lot easier than sitting there with a manual tube of solder paste and trying to squeeze it out. I find that's always a very frustrating process, and it's very hard to move the syringe and dispense the right amount and get it in the right spot. I mean, I can manage to do it, but I figured there had to be a better way. The brand on here is Diansu. Not really sure if that's really a company name or not. It's the DS-982, and I swear I've seen 982 on like half a dozen different knockoff soldering stations, hot air stations. Seems to be a very popular number. It also claims to be made of Taiwan technology and material. I'm not so sure about the technology part. As far as I understand it, these are sort of knockoffs of EFD, which is a US company. Aside from the main unit, they give you an air hookup line, and this is to connect from the air in port on the back to your air compressor. Now, one thing to note, in particular on my kit, I don't know if they're all like this, that is not a standard US style quick disconnect. It's very similar in how it works, but here it is next to a US standard. I think this is a 3/8 quick disconnect for compressor hoses, and you'll notice that this one's much larger. So this is the normal quick disconnect end that you would mate to, and that's a US fitting. You'll see the fitting that they supply, much too large. This is either metric or it's the next size up. There's also some quality control issues. It's very hard to see down inside here, but there's some leftover metal shavings from the lathe, and they didn't clean those out too well before they plated them and shipped them out. Can't say I'm that surprised, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to do some modifications to get this connected to my compressor right off the bat. That's okay. You also get 2 of these tube and fitting sets to connect the dispenser unit to the top of your syringe. And the way that works is that you take a syringe, normally this would have some material loaded into it, you fit it over the fitting. This could probably use a little bit of silicone grease or something like that. And then once it's on there, you rotate it so that it captures the spot you normally straddle with your fingers. And then that's basically all you need. Compressed air will then force the material out the nozzle. And speaking of nozzles, you can see quite a lot of sizes. 3 different sizes of the metal ones, and looks like 3 different sizes of the plastic tips. You'll note that these 2 syringe tops are different. This one's plastic. This particular vendor made a big deal out of the fact that they were including a metal one. And this looks like it's cast aluminum, or certainly cast something. I don't know if that it's a big deal. I don't know if these break. It certainly feels pretty robust. I don't know what kind of plastic it's made out of, but the number on it says NK30, and I believe that these are 30cc syringes. And I have seen vendors selling nothing but these for different size syringes, and I'm probably going to have to pick up a kit of different sizes. But I've not seen anybody actually selling the metal one standalone. And that was one of the things I liked about this vendor, that they were selling the one metal top anyway, included in the package. To control the dispensing of the glue or the solder paste or whatever it is that you're working with, one of the options that they include is this sleeve, which has a switch built into it. It's the same diameter as a syringe tube and has this 1/8 inch jack on the back of it, and that plugs back into the unit. But this basically allows you to grasp the syringe sort of like a pencil, and with your finger actuate it to dispense your solder paste. So if you were working on a board, you would basically just move around. I'm not sure I like the idea that your finger could disturb your positioning, but I can tell it's really not all that bad in practice. This arrangement is unfortunately seriously cheesy. It's just a very low quality, it looks like polyethylene or something, injection mold, really pretty low end. There's a tactile switch and what's supposed to be a PC board mount 1/8 inch jack just kind of jammed in there. Really kind of crappy job. I can see the wires protruding down here. When you plug it in, it's kind of floppy. You know, it's nothing special. It'll work. It's very simple. And it would probably be pretty easy to make something much nicer with a little bit of effort. So that's option number one. Option number two for dispensing is this included foot switch. This just has another 1/8 inch jack that allows you to plug it into the back of the control box, and you just hold the syringe with the tube coming out of it, and with your foot, every time you want to dispense, you just press it. No big deal. The upside to that is that you're not going to wiggle your hand trying to press the button. The downside, I guess, would be coordination. It probably takes a little bit to learn to get fast at doing that, but I imagine it's really not that bad. So the dispensing controller, pretty basic. On and off power switch. There's a manual and auto mode. Manual mode, I believe, is as long as you're pressing the dispense trigger, it will continue supplying pressure. And when it's in auto mode, it uses the timer built in. And that timer is adjustable via a potentiometer here up front. And there are, I think, 4 different ranges that you can set the whole unit to, from sub-second to tens of seconds. And this controls from min to max within any one of those ranges. The center control here is the pressure regulator. You pull it out to set it and then click it back in. This gauge, based on the pneumatic schematic that they include in the instruction manual, if I am to believe it, is actually downstream of the regulator. So this should show you the pressure that you are putting out to the syringe. The vacuum is an important feature on a unit like this. Internally, there's a little Venturi vacuum generator. You can look that up on Wikipedia to get a sense for how they work, but it uses the incoming air supply basically to generate a slight negative pressure. And this is basically a little regulator for the vacuum. And this will allow the unit to suck back a little bit on the syringe after you've stopped actuating, or after its timer is expired. And that will stop it from continuously dripping. Around the back side of the unit, we've got a fuse. I am curious to see if that is actually the correct value. It says 1/4 amp. There's an IEC power input here. It's got 110 volts written in handwritten ink right above it. I did specify the voltage when I ordered from this particular vendor, and that is always something you have to pay attention to when you're ordering equipment on eBay, in particular from China, because they ship all over the world. you know, it's anywhere from 100 volts to 240 volts, depending on what country you're in. Very important to get one with the correct voltage. Moving on, there's an 1/8 inch input jack for the foot switch or the hand switch. These 4 dip switches, which are labeled drip, I guess that makes them drip switches, are for setting up the range for the built-in timer. The manual describes what those ranges are, and we'll look at that a little bit later. I think these are commercially called like Festo connectors. That is the air supply. They do actually mention that it's supposed to be filtered and dry. I don't actually have an air dryer in my shop yet. I haven't gone to the extent of plumbing in shop air, but that's a project that's on my list for the next year. But what I do have is this completely low rent Harbor Freight oil water separator that I grabbed. I think they were on sale one day for a couple of dollars. And I just threaded in a couple of the typical fittings. And, you know, I doubt it's going to do much in terms of actually drying anything, but it does have a filter material inside of it, and I think that'll help keep any junk that's in the bottom of my compressor tank out of this unit. As with any gear from China, or maybe in this case Taiwan, Republic of China, you really want to have a good sense that it's not going to kill you when you plug it in. So to that end, I think I'm going to actually pop this thing open. So our AC comes in over here. It's a very small transformer, not particularly solidly mounted over here. Looks like they're not using the center tap on it. That does actually have a little piece of heat shrink. That's you know, a nice little touch. They could have just clipped that off and left it there. The fuse does appear to be in line, like you'd expect. The chassis is actually grounded to the ground pin on the IEC. It's grounded with a red wire, but it is grounded. It looks like the power switch on the front is actually hooked up, as you would hope. That's how they convert it from 110 to 240, or 120 to 240, whatever the voltage they set it up for. They clipped this wire. It's got a little bit of electrical tape on it. They reattached it to the center tap and put a little bit of electrical tape on that. And that's probably why this is loose. That may have been done by the exporter that I purchased it from. So I'm just going to torque these down a bit while I'm in here, because they probably had that transformer out to do that work. Otherwise it'd be very tricky to get into that corner. I see a 7812 voltage regulator, a tip 122 transistor, and some smaller transistors. I see an 8-pin package, which I would bet dollars to donuts is a 555, because it's just a timer. Yes, it is. NE555P. Yeah, no real surprise there. So that's their dirt simple, one-sided timer PC board. I haven't seen a board that low-tech in quite some time, but this isn't really a high-tech piece of equipment. This is the solenoid valve here, mounted to the back. And I bet that tip 122 is actually being used to switch the current to turn the solenoid valve on and off. Though, maybe not, actually. This separate little board over here, which has this jaunty cap on it, has a heat-sinked, some type of heat-sinked part that I can't quite see. So the secondary side of the transformer comes over on these white and black wires onto this board. This looks like it's the power supply board, or at least one of the power supply boards. There's 4, they look like 1 in 4001 diodes down there forming a bridge rectifier probably. There's a big bulk cap on here, smaller cap. This is probably a voltage regulator with the little heatsink on it. And then the red and black wires jumper back over to the main board. The thing that's a little odd, though, is that there's a voltage regulator also on this main board. There's a 7812 over there, along with a tip 122, 555. I don't know, I'm not going to trace it all out. No real worries there. The rest of the stuff inside of here really is, it's all the pneumatic stuff. There's the air inlet. Looks like it actually goes to a couple places. This little simple arrangement here, I believe, is actually the Venturi vacuum generator. Pretty simple. The overall air regulator here, you can see the back end of it in the middle. Some connections over to the solenoid valve. A connection back to the front panel for the connection to the syringe dispenser. And that's about it. And it's really funny seeing all this pneumatic stuff mixed in with the kind of low-tech electronic stuff. But, you know, that's the sort of product it is. Some kind of jank, foamy-looking glue that I sort of haven't seen the likes of since I remember in the early 80s taking apart like old Walkmans and radios and stuff like that. Seeing these kind of low-quality PC boards with that kind of stuff, is that glue that they're holding these boards in there with is really kind of a throwback. Just putting this back together, and man, these screws are made out of cheese. The threads don't look like they're fully cut. That one seems like it's stripped. Let's see if it's the same on this side. Yeah, they're going in at an angle. Get it tightened down. Yeah, they're stripped. You can hear it just click over. So there's a fuse. It's one of the mini types. And it says a half amp instead of a quarter amp, but you know, I'll forgive them that. At least it's not 50 amps. Put that back in. I'm going to see if I can rig up something for an air supply, and we'll try to give this thing a test. So in order to get this thing hooked up to my compressor, I quickly whipped up this little ugly looking jig here. This is just a couple of standard compressor fittings, quick disconnects, back to back, and what I've got here on the end is actually the improvised part. Forgive the fact that it's all gnarled and mangled looking. I just had to tighten it up with a pair of pliers, but this was a MIG welding tip that I ran through the lathe. I turned down the end of it and put some sort of quasi barbs here, you can see, to hold the hose. And I also drilled it out so that it's a much wider diameter than it was to begin with. And the whole idea here is that the tubing will just slide over this. And the barbs will hold it in place like any other barbed fitting. Should also mention that I did tap the inside of this thing. Actually, I did this for another project. I was making an air nozzle using MIG nozzle, so I had already had this lying around. Unfortunately, I don't remember the tap size off the top of my head, but it was a standard tap. It wasn't actually a pipe thread tap, so it made it quite easy just to grab another cheap MIG tip out of my pile and build this thing up. So let's see if it works. Now, unfortunately, I hear this thing leaking. So my little hacked improvised fitting is not quite working right. You can actually see the liquid Teflon I used oozing out. Well, a little bit of Teflon tape seemed to solve the problem. It seems to be holding air now. The barb for the hose seems to be working pretty well, and we've got air flowing into the unit. All right, so I've transferred out some of this Kester solder paste that I have, which is, I believe, well past expiration. Yeah, this still has a 2011 date of manufacture on it, November. So it's at least 6 to 8 months out of date. That could be having an effect, but we'll find out. I've got the piston inside of the syringe. I dispensed, I don't really know how much, probably 2 or 3 cc's worth of solder paste here in the bottom. I put on a fatter tip that I actually had out of my own collection. This is a brown tip. I don't know what diameter that is. Put on the the metal connector to go back to the control unit. So we're set up in auto mode at about 50 psi, no vacuum. I'm using the foot switch, and on this old PC board, I'm just going to try to put down some solder paste onto these discrete pads, and these are fairly large. They're 805s, so should be fairly easy. Now, there is quite a delay in the system. I press the trigger now. That does the timed pressurization of the tube, and it takes a little bit of time for it to flow out and finally be ready for you to actually smear on the pad. You can get the rhythm down once you've done a few of them. I will say that this is way easier than trying to do it with the syringe, even with the less than ideal conditions, even though my paste is flowing like molasses in January, and I don't really have a lot of experience on the system yet. I can already say this is probably 5 to 10 times more pleasant than doing it with the traditional syringe. Very easy to control where you have the tip, very easy not to shake off of that when you're trying to apply pressure on the syringe. This is definitely a world of difference for one-off prototype assembly. So again, on this old board, there's really not too much high density, but this is SO package here, and I can get a rhythm going here and get this pasted up pretty easily. And here's doing some 603s. All the bypass caps on this board are 603s. I expect partly because my paste is not flowing very well at all, that I haven't really had to use the vacuum function for the pullback. Whenever I dispense, it puts out an amount and it doesn't really seem to keep flowing. One thing to note, because this is actually a Venturi, when you do turn it on, you hear it hissing basically. It's just venting air inside. So is this thing worth it? I think it is. It's not exactly free, but if you're really into doing electronics either for work or as a hobby, or both. And you're building a lot of prototype boards. You're designing your own PCBs or even buying other people's PC board designs and putting them together. And you're not using stencils, but you are using solder paste. This just makes life so much better than the old manual syringe. I just can't say enough how annoying it has always been to me to use these things. So I think the amount of control that you get with this system is incredible. You really can just get very fine positioning and dispense just the right amount of paste and apply it. You're not shaking when you're trying to press the plunger on the syringe. Yeah, it's a little tricky and a little bit, it's going to take a little bit of work on your part to really fine tune the system to find the best pressures, to find the best paste that flows in this type of syringe, get the timing just right. But, you know, experimentation is fun, and playing around with this stuff is part of the enjoyment, I think, of doing it in the first place. I mean, if you just wanted to get a board that worked, you'd just buy it. Why would you even be putting it together yourself to begin with? So it's all about getting your process tuned and just having fun with it. So I look forward to having the chance to put this thing through its paces a bit more. I've got some projects coming up in the next couple of weeks. I've got some boards coming back from OSH Park. Looking forward to that. I'll be building those up. Those have a lot of through-hole on them, but they do still have a fair amount of surface mount components. So I'll get to put this thing to the test in a real-world situation. I think in the meantime, I'm going to try to track down some fresher solder paste and see if that makes a difference at all to the way this thing works. And if there's any big news, I will do a new video. So until next time, this is Steve signing off. Take care. Whatever this is, it looks pretty exciting.